This is Jonathan Gephart with 643 Insurance, and I have with me today Dan Durrant from Durrant Law. And Dan is a personal injury attorney. I'm just going to let him introduce himself.
Hello, Dan Durrant. My law firm is Durrant Associates. We are in Northeast Mesa. For those that are, it's convenient for them to meet at my office. I do meet them here, but I also travel throughout the valley to meet with clients at their convenience.
Okay, Dan. Well, thank you for being with us today, and want to talk about personal injury and how it relates to insurance. What does a personal injury attorney do?
Well, a personal injury attorney is an advocate for an injured party. Whenever someone is injured due to the fault of someone else, then they have a legal right to claim against that person. Typically, that person will have insurance, and so the insurance company will pay for the damages that were caused by the at-fault party. And so we are an advocate for the injured party to get what they deserve from the insurance company. And so our interests are somewhat opposed, but really the biggest part of my job is to present to the insurance companies the information, the documentation, the medical records, everything that they need to document their file so that when there is a payout, it's justified on their records, and it pleases the client, but it's also justified on the part of the insurance. And that's kind of what we help facilitate.
What you're saying is, it's easier for you to help the client get made whole because you have the justifiable evidence to show that there's actually these injuries sustained.
Exactly.
Perfect.
The client can, let's say, for example, the client goes to the hospital and there's a diagnosis of concussion. Well, the client thinks, I have a concussion, they should compensate me for that. The insurance company says, this was done by a hospital, by someone who's trained in emergency medicine, which is basically to keep people alive and to stop bleeding, but not necessarily the intricacies of neurology. And so they may not accept that diagnosis from the emergency room doctor. So my job is, I now have this diagnosis. How do I get my client compensated for that diagnosis in a way that the insurance company will feel good about giving that compensation? And so if I tell my client, you have that diagnosis from the hospital, but you may be better off being seen by a board certified neurologist, and that board certified neurologist may disagree with the hospital and may say, no, you know what, you really don't have a concussion. You were thrown for a loop, but this doesn't qualify as an actual concussion. And that happens many times, whereas sometimes they do say, yes, you absolutely do. And now the insurance company has documentation that fits their expectations and can pass muster from a supervisor asking, why was that compensated?
Great. And what type of people can you help?
Well, at my law firm, we help three basic types of people: people that have been injured in a car crash, people that have been involved in a dog bite incident, and people who have suffered injuries on a premises, like a big box store, a grocery store, something like that.
What are the steps that people need to take after an auto accident? And I'm going to talk to it from a insurance perspective, and then I'm going to hand it off to you, see if you have anything to add from the legal perspective. The first thing to do, of course, is to check for injuries. And you may not notice there's injuries right away because adrenaline after an accident, things of that nature, but check to see for any major injuries. Get to a safe space is the second step. Whether it's to move the car off to the side of the road, if it's available to do so, get to a safe space so that it prevents from causing further injury or another accident happening. The third step is to call 911. You want to make sure that the police arrive, because in an insurance claim, they're going to ask for documentation, and what better documentation from police? And after you call 911, you'll want to make sure to exchange information with the drivers. If it's safe to do so, and if everyone's in good condition where they can safely exchange that information. I know in some serious accidents, it may not be feasible. That's where the police will probably gather that information, put it on their report so that the other party can get that information. But exchange information with the other drivers. Do not admit fault to the other driver. Do not admit fault to the police. Do not admit fault to anybody, because the reality is your job is to accurately report the events that happened leading up to the accident. It's not my responsibility as a driver admitting fault. That's the job of the police, and that's the job of the insurance adjusters to determine who was at fault for that accident based on the facts that are presented and the timelines of the parties involved. The next thing to do is to document as much as you can. Take pictures of the vehicle if it's safe to do so. Take pictures of injuries if there are any that are visible. As you're going through this process, if you believe the other party is at fault, do not file the claim through your insurance company. The reason for that is because when you file claims on your insurance policy, even though it's a not at fault accident, your policy could be rated for having that accident on the policy. If not rated, they have a way of re-tiering policies and removing discounts such as accident-free discounts and things of that nature. And so it's important to, if the other party's at fault, try to file that claim through the other party's insurance company. And then if the other party's playing games, they're not taking responsibility, they're not paying for what they're supposed to be paying for, then at that point you can involve your insurance company and file the claim through your policy, and they will subrogate, which that means that they'll go after the other party to get reimbursed for what they paid for that they shouldn't be responsible for paying for. And so from here, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Dan. Dan, is there anything that I missed, especially from the legal aspect?
Well, first of all, you did a great job outlining the steps. So my commentary is more to elaborate rather than to add.
Sure.
So what I would elaborate on would be documentation is king. When we present a claim to the insurance company, once again, they're not going to provide compensation for anything that isn't documented in their file. And I understand that. I don't hold them in contempt for that. I think that's reasonable. So documentation is king. And when Jonathan, when you mentioned taking pictures, I would include in the picture taking any items that have been destroyed in the accident, such as I've had clients that have had laptops destroyed, iPhones, eyeglasses, their clothes, because when the paramedics show up, either the paramedics themselves or in the hospital, they cut their clothes off. And many times those are expensive clothes that, that clients get really antsy about wanting compensation for. So take pictures of anything that that you want compensated because of the accident that was destroyed in the accident. Because if we show up to the insurance adjuster and say, you know what, she had a 5-carat diamond and it was just destroyed in the accident, you know, they're going to need that justified. So take those pictures. Now, with respect to the police, I can't endorse what Jonathan said enough about calling the police, having them come make a report, even if it's a simple accident, even if it's like a rear ender. What's more simple than, you know, at fault vehicle, rear ends, innocent vehicle, right? That's the most simple accident there is. Why call the police for that? Well, you need to have that documented because the person in the heat of the moment, the defendant that was in the at-fault vehicle will say things in the heat of the moment that they won't say later when they're more calm. And so if an officer is there with his notepad taking down what the person says, then that is very valuable documentation that we can then use to the insurance company. And sometimes that is, recently, I was on my way to see my daughter in the hospital. Now, I feel bad for the defendant that had the concern for his daughter in his mind and in his heart when he was hurrying, but that was the reason that his judgment was clouded and the reason that he caused the collision. And you won't have that if it's just the bare facts of one car hits the other. You won't have the explanation of why. Another recent explanation was, I got a text message on my phone and I glanced to look at the text, and that's when the collision occurred. Well, you won't have that either if the police officer's there asking the questions and writing it down. So these things are really, really important by way of documenting what happened. And when you get to make the claim, documentation is king.
That's really good information. So thank you so much for sharing that. Even in small fender bender types accidents where it's someone's at stoplight and they get rear-ended, even at a slow speed, there can still be injuries from that. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. And we have a set of videos called Man versus Machine. And what they have done, there's 2 sets of them. The first set were done with live volunteers. The second set were done strictly with mannequins. And the reason is, on the set that was done with live volunteers, they kept hurting them really badly. What they were doing is they were recreating accidents at different miles per hour. Here's one at 3 miles per hour in slow motion. Here's one at 5 miles per hour, etc. And they had live people in there with slow-mo video, and you would see the hyperextension, hyperflexion, and it was really wonderful evidence of what happens even at slow speeds. But they were really hurting the people that they were using as the crash test dummies, and so they did another set of them with actual dummies. But to answer your question, yes, you get hurt even at the smallest low speeds, and it's all about the movement of the vehicle, because that is where the injury occurs, is with the movement of the vehicle. And so if you have one car that's cemented in the ground and one car that's on skis on ice, and they're identical vehicles, hit at identical speeds, the one that's cemented to the ground will have a lot of property damage, but the person inside won't be hurt at all because there was no movement to cause that injury. Whereas the one on skis on ice, there will be virtually no property damage because all of the energy went to propelling the vehicle across the ice. And so you won't have a lot of property damage, but you'll have a lot of injury because that's where the injury takes place, is with that movement. And so that's one reason why the pictures are not necessarily demonstrative of exactly what happened. They're demonstrative of the minimum that happened. There was at least enough energy involved to cause what we are seeing in the picture, but we don't know, and just looking at a picture, we don't know how far the vehicle was pushed, and that's where the injury takes place. But yes, even at small, if the person does not have their foot on the brake and they're hit even at a low speed and the car lurches forward, there will be injury.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And something I didn't talk to you about, but it just popped in my mind. One thing where it doesn't make sense to call the police is in a parking lot, because they can't do anything about that. Am I wrong about that? I mean, what do you suggest in a parking lot when there's an accident?
Yeah,
it's private property.
They don't respond to private property. With the minor exception, if there's DUI involved, then they will respond to DUI, even if it is in a parking lot. And I'm glad that they do, because we want to get DUI drivers off the road wherever they are. But if it's just a typical fender bender in a parking lot, then everything that Jonathan said about what to do applies, except for the calling the police, because they just won't respond to private property.
What are some important coverages that can be overlooked on an auto policy?
That's a great question. And that question reminds me of the very first wrongful death situation that I ever had as an attorney. The state minimum liability coverage at the time was $15,000. It's currently $25,000. But the defendant at the time had the minimum of $15,000, and the occupant of the innocent vehicle did not have any of the optional coverages that Jonathan is hinting at. Uninsured, underinsured, MedPay, didn't have any of those coverages. And so all we were able to do on behalf of the widow, because it was the husband that was killed, was get her the state minimum of $15,000, and that's all that we were able to do. I've had other wrongful deaths where the client had great coverages on their own policy of uninsured, underinsured, and we were able to get hundreds of thousands of dollars for those clients because of the coverages that they had on their own policy. So uninsured is what covers if the defendant has no insurance. Underinsured is what covers if they have insurance, but not enough to cover all of the damages that they caused. And both of them are critical to have in order for me, again, as the advocate for the injured party. I am hamstrung to do my job if the defendant either has no coverage or less than they needed, and my client doesn't have UMUIM. UMUIM standing for uninsured, underinsured. But if they have those coverages, then I, as an advocate, have more ability to get adequate compensation for my clients. So those are often overlooked, but critical to have. And I'll say one more thing, that that different agents, you've got to have the right one, like Jonathan, because some agents have told my clients, oh, don't worry, I sold you full coverage. And what those agents mean is, I've sold you what the law requires you to have, and therefore you're fully covered. Well, in my eyes, you're not fully covered unless you had uninsured, underinsured, medical payments. Now you're fully covered. And there is no industry definition for the term full coverage. Different agents say that, meaning different things.
Yeah.
And so you really need to get yourself into the hands of a quality agent like Jonathan. And then when you hear the term full coverage, have that agent explain exactly what they mean by full coverage, so that you have these important coverages that are optional, but in my view, critical.
When people reach out for insurance quotes, I hear that all the time. I've got full coverage. Well, what does that mean, right? I mean, full coverage is a jargon term that doesn't really mean anything, because it doesn't define really what the coverages are. And so, like you said, it's just the full coverage is just the minimum that you need that is state mandated. But there are, like you had mentioned, uninsured, underinsured, very important coverages. Medical payments, very important. Did you talk about medical payments?
I mentioned it, but let me elaborate a little bit on why it's so important. Let's say that you have health insurance, and so you say to yourself, well, why do I need medical payments coverage if I have health insurance? Because medical payments does, as it sounds, it pays for medical bills that are necessary as the result of a collision. And so why do that if you have health insurance? Well, the first thing is, most health insurances don't cover chiropractic, and yet most accidents are the fender bender type. I mean, there are the more serious type, right? But on the whole, most of them are fender bender type. Well, if you need chiropractic for that and your health insurance doesn't cover it, there's an excellent reason to have medical payments coverage, because it will pay chiropractic. Another reason is, most of us out there are not the ones going to be causing accidents, right? Those that are paying attention to Jonathan's podcast are the ones that are diligent drivers. But if you happen to be having your worst day and you cause an accident, the medical payments coverage will cover you even if you're the at-fault driver. So that's a remarkable benefit, that medical payments covers regardless of fault. And then another thing that I'll say is, even if you have quality health insurance, you're going to have deductibles and you're going to have co-pays. And so what we do is we'll lead with the person's health insurance, right? Get the benefit of the health insurance, and then we'll follow behind with the medical payments coverage to cover those deductibles and co-pays. And that stretches out the benefit of the health insurance and gets you the most out of the med pay. And then here's another wonderful little nugget. The law that requires the defendant to pay for what they've caused, the defendant is responsible through the law of negligence, but the insurance company is now responsible through a contract that they've made with the person, saying, we will indemnify you if you cause an accident. Well, that law requires that they pay irrespective of what insurance they have. And so if my client has med pay and health insurance, and the defendant has insurance, then I can put the injuries in front of the defendant insurance, and they need to pay the full amount. I can also submit those bills to MedPay, and they'll pay. And this is strictly above board. There's no double dipping. It's just a matter of liability law and your own contract with your own carrier for MedPay. And so we can recover, pay the doctor, and still have money. If we pay the doctor once, right, because he only deserves one, if we pay him out of the liability, then the MedPay goes to the client. Or if we pay him out of MedPay, then the liability portion that was going to the doctor goes to the client. So we could really use those coverages to maximize the in-pocket recovery for our clients.
Going back to the underinsured, uninsured, either someone that's driving that doesn't have an insurance policy in place, or it could even be a situation where there's a hit and run driver. There's just no insurance policy. There's no person to go after because you don't know who did it. And so, but the underinsured portion, State minimum coverage is 25,000 per person, 50,000 per occurrence, and then 15,000 for property damage. And let's be real, 15,000. How many vehicles on the road today can you cover for 15,000? Especially with inflation these days, not very many. So, in reality, underinsured is if someone has state minimum coverage. That's almost a guarantee underinsured type of a person. And so, if you are involved in an accident with somebody who has state minimum coverage, I was just looking up some stats. At the average medical bills due to an accident, not a serious one, but just an accident where there's a hospital involved, is about $42,000. If you have $42,000 in medical bills from a hospital, and the other party is only paying 25,000, you're left with $17,000 on the hook. That's on you now. Hopefully, health insurance would pick some of that up, but probably not going to pick up some of that, I should say. If you don't have medical payments, if you don't have uninsured, underinsured motorist coverages, it's just leaving you very exposed. I hear a lot of times, I can't afford this policy. I can't afford to have higher coverages for liability. Bodily injury liability coverages, or I can't afford to have carry comprehensive and collision coverage on my vehicle, but it's just too expensive. I can't afford to add medical payments or uninsured, underinsured motorist. I hear that a lot, and my question to people is, if you can't afford the increase on your auto policy, how can you afford all of the extra costs that you're going to incur if you don't have those coverages and something happens? And people always think it can't happen to me. But you can attest, it happens to a lot of people. You see those people, you work with those people. And so those coverages are very important. And, we just got to find a way to make sure that that people are carrying the right coverages for their needs. And, if everybody in the state of Arizona carried the right coverages to take care of other people when they cause an incident, our insurance wouldn't be as high. That's the reality of things. The reason why it's so high is because of all the uninsured drivers, underinsured drivers that are driving around. The people who are doing the responsible thing and carrying the right coverages are paying for everybody, themselves and everybody else who's not following the rules.
I'll add two things to that. This is one of the scary things that I have found during the life of my practice. I have found people that will go to an insurance agent and buy a 6-month policy, pay the premiums on the first month, and get the card for their car, for the glove compartment, to show the police or whatever that they have insurance, but they only pay the first month, and then they let the other 5 lapse. And then when the card that they show the police, when that lapses, then they go in and they get a new policy for another 6 months, pay the first month of premium. So in any 12-month period, they're only covered for 2 months out of that 12 months when they buy the policy and pay the first month's premiums. And so even if they have the card, you can't trust that they have insurance.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything that maybe I didn't bring up?
There's something that that I feel very strongly about that Jonathan, I'll tell your listeners, you didn't ask me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. There is a difference between a captured agent and a broker, and the captured agent can only sell, if they're from XY insurance company, they can only sell insurance that are XY coverages, right? And whether they are the best or the best priced is not an issue for an agent that's all that they can sell. And so what I want for my clients is to have the best coverages for the best prices. And the only way that you can get that is from someone like Jonathan that has access to dozens of different companies and is constantly monitoring rates from dozens of different companies. And therefore, when they present you a policy, it is the best rate with the best coverages for the best rate. And that's really, if you don't think that you can afford this coverage or that coverage, then what you really need to do is get with an agent like Jonathan that can get you the best rate. And then once you have the coverage that you need, then the cuts that you find in your budget come from not going to swig 5 times out of 7 days, or not having that latte or whatever, because those things don't really affect your future, but being properly covered in an accident will affect your future.
Well, Dan, I'll go ahead and put your contact information on this video. So if anybody has any questions, that they can reach out to you. Just from talking from experience, we have been in a situation where we've had to use Dan, but we've also had some clients that have used his services, and we've heard some really good things. We've had a great experience working with Dan, and we've heard good things from those who we have referred to Dan, and he's a stand-up guy. One of the things that you hear about attorneys, especially personal injury attorneys, is you hear ambulance chasers, you hear all these different terms for lawyers. But Dan is a stand-up guy. He's a family man. He is someone who I trust. I would not send my clients to be helped by lawyers who I wouldn't be able to stand behind. And Dan is a great guy, great family man. And if you have any situations where you are not at fault for an accident, I highly recommend that you reach out to Dan. And I will recommend, if you reach out to us, I will recommend that you reach out to Dan to be made whole. And so thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. And again, Dan Durrant from Durrant Law, and I will put Dan's contact information in the video. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you can check out our upcoming videos.